So the Happy Death Day 1 and 2 are some of the most underrated films, in my opinion, of all time. I absolutely love these films, and today we're going to give a review for Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day 2 and tell you guys why, in my opinion, I absolutely love these films. Very my thoughts. If you've seen them, I'd love to know all your thoughts down in the comment section below. Which one do you love? Do you love both of them? Do you love the first one or not like the second one? Or do you like the second one and not like the first one? Do you not really like any of them? I'll let you know all your thoughts down in the comments below. And of course, spoilers for all these films. I'm going to be talking deep down spoilers. So without further ado, let's start off with the original Happy Death Day. So if you basically do not know the plot of Happy Death Day, this girl named Tree, which is basically like this perfect person that you'd see in so many things, as this is her birthday. So basically, she goes to this party, and then this killer in a baby mask decides, hey, let me just kill her. And then, but really, she relives the day over and over again until she can find the person who keeps on killing her. So it's Groundhog Day meets Edge of Tomorrow meets a bit of a horror film, and in my opinion, that's one of the perfect blends. This is such a great movie. And now, I'm not just saying this because this is just a really fun film. It really much is. But I think as a concept, it's been done so many times before. But I feel like there's enough originality and enough kind of nuances to really do. Because this is more, I would say, of a comedy than a horror film. There definitely is a little bit of horror elements in there. But I would say this is much more of a comedy than a horror film, which going into it, you would expect it to be a horror film, and on the Wikipedia it says horror thriller, but really watching it, I'm just like, I don't really see a horror thriller, because this movie is so tongue-in-cheek, and it takes itself not so seriously like I think a lot of horror films do, and I feel like that, for a lot of people, that's kind of off and like kind of jarring, and people are just like, well, I don't really like that. But for me, being somebody who doesn't really like horror films, I think that's a perfect. But the performances here, especially the main girl is Tree, one of the best It's not an Oscar performance, but she just seems like she's having such a fun time and such a great old time with this role, and I actually do think it actually makes the character feel much more, because at first you do not like this character at all. She's like, I guess, sleeping with her principal or somebody, or she's just kind of the worst person. But by the end of the film, and as she's building and looking and kind of learning and kind of evolving as she's getting killed in these murders in a very hilarious way, by the way, which we'll get into in a second, you actually feel for this character. At first, you start the film being like, I only like this character because she's super annoying and unlikable and just seems like a bit of a jerk. But then at the end of the film, you're like, oh yeah, she was a very nice person in a way, and she learned her lesson. And it's kind of a lesson learning film, and something that the second one definitely does take on and take over. But let's talk about the kills in this film. It's very amusing, because the first time she gets killed in the party, that one's much more of a horror. I would say the first time she gets killed is horror. The second time she gets killed is horror. But then it kind of just turns into this montage of her getting killed and kind of her reliving this day and trying to do the same thing over and over again. And we've seen kind of montages like this before in so many other movies like this. Like I said, Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise. But in this film does it in such a, as I said, fun and chic way, and doesn't take itself super seriously. And the kills and stuff are very creative, with this movie, again, being PG-13. It's the violence is toned down very much. But I feel like the kills are creative enough and invented enough, especially in the second one, which we'll get to later in this video. But I feel like the kills are they're laid out enough where the kills feel unique and focused without feeling overstuffed and overcrowded with so many things. Like the first time she gets killed in this party, it kind of it's intense, but then as you continue going on, and I would say the mystery that's building in this film is very simple. I would say if you really want to nitpick this film, the person who does it the way she does it, it's her roommate. She has a roommate, ends up doing it, and it's the most stupidest thing I've seen in a movie ever. Oh, you sleep with my husband. I think it was her husband. I'm not quite sure. And it's just like, really? That's kind of a stupid way. But again, I'm not taking that in such a grain of salt, because this world isn't that realistic, because they're not taking themselves as seriously. So when it's just like, oh, it's just because she slept with somebody that she was in love with, it was kind of stupid, but it made sense in this movie's story, because it doesn't take itself as seriously. Let's talk about the horror element in this film. It's tamed like very much. This film isn't really that scary. If you can't handle some jump scares, I would say the jump scares in this film aren't even that much. There is some very subtly creepy moments, which I definitely did appreciate. I think there's a moment where she's down the hall and she just sees a guy. There's some really good creepy elements in this film, but this is much more of a comedy than it is a horror film. But again, if you can't handle some jump scares and some creepy elements, and there is definitely some of that in there, but I think the movie kind of structure itself with let's have some jokes, let's have a bit of horror in there, let's go back to jokes, let's have some serious moments. And since this film is paced perfectly well and each of these moments blended perfectly with the story, they don't feel like, oh, this is a horror element, and then the next scene there's a joke. It doesn't feel like it wastes the scene, or when there's serious moments, it doesn't feel like it kind of drags the film down to a scratching halt, if you know what I mean. It just kind of feels like a member, and this film is so fun and so much fun just to keep on watching. And because yes, and the way this film, there is a romance in this film that is very typical, but I think this film is very self-aware of what it's doing. Let's talk about what doesn't work. This film isn't perfect. Again, the way the killer is and the way the mystery is, rewatching it, you can't really follow it that much. Like when you learn about the mystery, like in context, when she does a little bit of a retrack and she tells the roommate why she did it and how she did it and what she thinks it is, it makes sense for the most part. Sometimes this film is just a bit too. Sometimes the film is a bit too jokey, and sometimes there's tension where there should just be tension, but they kind of break it up for a joke. You know, a lot of horror films do this in a type of way. The romance itself isn't really too amazing, but overall, Happy Death Day, in my opinion, is an extremely fun film, and I'm going to give Happy Death Day a B+. So now let's talk about Happy Death Day to You. Okay, so Happy Death Day to You was actually a film that came out last year. I just saw this year, actually. So, this film, very great. I'm going to be honest, this is a very great sequel. I don't think it's as good as the first, but let's talk about what works. The performance is still, from the girl of Tree, still really great. And Tree definitely does deal with a lot more things in this film. The plot of this film is basically the same thing. With the first one, with just a couple more tweak elements. So the plot is going to get very confusing if I try to explain the plot a bit more. So the opening of this film takes different. There's the one guy that we see a lot in the film. He's like, I think, Oriental or something. I'm not really sure. Don't quote me on that. And he's the guy for the first, 10 minutes of this film, so you think that's the person. But then he makes this device called Sizzy, and it kind of messes and puts a time loop. So Tree is back in the same element that she was in the first one. But twist, it's a different reality. Her mother's alive, even though she was dead. Her boyfriend is dating somebody else, and it days for a lot of humor. This is a lot more of a comedy than the first one, because the first one had comedy, but also had a lot of more scary elements mixed in the film. I would say the first 10 minutes are more of a horror film. You know, the baby guy is chasing around, and there's really good jump scares and some really good intense scenes. But the rest of it is just kind of a horror. By the time you see the baby guy, it's just kind of like, hello. But this film changes genre. It switches genres midway, where it starts as a horror film, but then it goes on to this, sci-fi comedy. And I like that. It changes genres, so it splices up a bit. One of my favorite personal sequences is the scene between Tree and her mom at this diner where they go for her birthday. I thought first of all, the performances were great in that sequence, and also the acting, and as I said, the writing. But it's such a wholesome scene because it actually is a message that you can actually relate to. Well, I wouldn't say really relate to, but the scene is so wholesome because this film has so many comedy stitch and a bit of horror and elements. And once we get to these dramatic and more emotional sequences, like the first one, it doesn't feel crammed or it doesn't feel overstuffed. It actually feels unique and actually doesn't really feel overplayed in the film, and I think it kind of blends in much more. I would say the horror elements of the film are definitely the weaker parts of this film. There are some really good moments where the guy, the guy who brings this time machine is chasing down, and the baby comes down in the boiler. That's a really cool, this little basement time scene. That's a really cool and intense sequence. But this is much more of a comedy. This is much more weirder than the first one, doing different timelines and jump loops, which easily got convoluted. But the film again is so tongue-in-cheek that the film kind of burns. I love the different reality that Tree's boyfriend is dating somebody else that she does. The kills are very unique. There's a montage where she has to memorize all this code so she can get back, and she has to keep killing herself. So many great moments, a lot of fun. So this film is, as I said, very tongue-in-cheek, very much of a comedy, much more than the horror film. it kind of puts the horror film to a back seat for a bit, and I thought this film was extremely fun. The actual ending where it was Tree's roommate's guy again, you can kind of see it from a mile away. Let's talk about what doesn't work. At times, this film just gets far too convoluted, and I wouldn't say convoluted, but at times this film, there's just sometimes too many things going on, and I would have liked a bit more horror elements in this film, because the first one I thought had a perfect blend of horror, comedy, drama, romance, and I thought it was a perfect blend. This one, why still very good, not as good as the first one with balancing those things. Sometimes the horror, the comedy moments and the drama moments I felt worked really well. But every time there's a horror element, even though this is supposed to be a horror film, kind of just felt like it wasn't really working at the time. And I think this film was a tad bit too long. I feel like it was staying its welcome a bit too long. Overall, Happy Death Day to You, I thought was a lot of fun, and I'm going to give it a B. So those are my thoughts on both Happy Death Days. I know this was a bit of an odd video, but I just really wanted to talk about these films because I feel like these films weren't talked about as much. I'll love to know your guys' thoughts of these films down in the comments below. If you guys like this video, you guys can hit that like button and subscribe and hit the post notification bell so you guys never miss on it when I upload another video. And let me know if you guys want to see more videos like this, talk about more of these films on the channel. You guys can also check out my podcast I do every other Tuesday morning with a friend of mine. It's called the Two Peas in Pod podcast, where we talk movies, TV shows, and you guys can also check out my Instagram at General_Daniel77. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you guys next time. General out.